Morning as we go to the Chita. So today we start with the Chumash. We are holding in the book of Leviticus, the Parshas Bahar, chapter 25, verse number 39. If your brother becomes destitute, and he'll be sold to you, you should not work with him slave labor. Now she says, what does that mean? Degrading work, through which he's made to look like a slave. He must not carry his clothes after him, the bathhouse, to put on his shoes. He's not your slave. He is your slave, but you're not allowed to treat him like that. He should be like an employee, a hired person. Until the 50th year of Jubilee, he works with you. Now she says, "Avedis kaika." What's a employee? Somebody works the agriculture, craftsmanship. Like any other employee, but you're hired to work on your land. You hire your employees to work in your house or whatever in your business. What does the Torah teach us? That even if the Jubilee occurs before the 6 years, if Jubilee falls into the middle of the 6 years of when he sold himself, he still goes out free, even though the 6 years haven't finished. Verse 41, and then he shall leave you. Who uban of Imai, him and his sons with him, and he returns to his family, and he resumes the status of his fathers. Now she says, Abba Shimon said, if he was sold, who sold his children? What is the meaning that his children go out? However, from here we learn, Abba Shimon says, that the master, the one who buys him, is obligated to buy food for his children, and in this sense, they are released with their father. So when he frees him, he doesn't have the obligation of supporting the family. But now she says his father's former honor, meaning he must not be degraded. You're not allowed to remind him and say, tell him, you were a servant. Because they are my servants. Which I took them out of the land of Egypt. I took the Jews out of Egypt that they'll never be servants anymore. So therefore, they're not your servant. My contract comes first. So therefore, they cannot sell themselves. They can sell themselves, but they're not slaves. Namely, by public announcement saying, here's a slave for slave. Neither may they stand him upon the auction block. You're not allowed to work hard, rigor, labor. You shall fear God. Now she says unnecessary jobs for the purpose of tormenting him. Do not say to him, warm me up, this drink for me, when you do not need it. Under the vine until it comes back, and you never came back. Perhaps you'll say, no one really knows whether it's necessary or not. I say that it's necessary. This matter is held secretly with man's heart. So therefore, the Torah says, you shall fear God. Verse 44, your male and female servants that comes from the nations of the world. Those are that where you should acquire servants and maidservants. So now she says, if you may say, if so, that I may give my Jewish servants only skilled labor, so who's going to do my unskilled labor? Over my Jewish servants, I don't have any really power. I must treat them as hired employees. Therefore, the Torah says there's 7 nations I'm not allowed to possess as a slave. For you warn me they should not live, so where am I getting slaves? They'll be slaves for you, the nations of the world. Not from those 7 Canaanite nations that are within the borders of your land. For indeed, regarding them, I said that nobody's allowed to live. So therefore, they'll have to come from different parts of the world. Also, those children, those residents, if Goyim come to live in the land of Israel, non-Jewish people come to live and they want to become slaves, sell themselves as slaves, that's people you can buy. For their families that have children, it's called a ger. We're mentioning yes, a ger toshav. And any non-Jew wants to come to live in the land of Israel is allowed to, as long as he doesn't worship idols. And those they have children, and their children can if they want, they can sell themselves as slaves. Now she says, come from the surrounding lands to marry women in your land who subsequently bore children for them. In these cases, the lineage of the child follow the father, and thus not fall under the commandment, you shall not allow them to live, the soul to live, but you are permitted to acquire them. So then even if they were part of the 7 nations, if they married by a Jew, it goes to the mother. By a non-Jew, it goes to the father. So if you have children, when the rest of the nations came and they said they had a relationship with one of the women of the 7 nations, they can continue to live in this country. Verse 46: and those slaves that you have, you can inherit it to your children. These slaves can be slaves forever. Those are slaves. But in the brethren of your children of Israel, a man shall not work his brother befarech in the vigor. Now she says, you shall hold them as an inheritance for your children after you, but it will be incorrect to explain to bequeath them to your children. For if so, then the scripture would have said, instead of visnachaltam. The verb is reflective, just like the word vischazaktem. And then, so here, visachaltam must be considered not to be causative, but rather reflective. It means you should keep them as inheritance. Ish ba'achiv, but has the prohibition regarding Jewish servant not already been stated in verse 43? It's repeated here to include in the prohibition a leader over his people and a king over his attendants. That these rulers must not work with vigor. Even a king is not allowed to take advantage of his slaves. And that completes the Chumash of the day. We are coming to the end of chapter 48 in Tanya. So again, the Alter Rebbe ends off with this concept of the Yediyas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the knowledge of God and His thought, and the concept that the Eibusha's thought is different than the thought of a human being, because when a person thinks, it's separate from the physical thing, and it's not one with it, but by the Eibishter, by God, He's one with His thought, and everything as it is in His thought right now. That's what the Alter Rebbe ends off this chapter. The thought, the knowledge, however, of God, which is united in the essence of His being. As the Rambam writes, He is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. Previously, this is brought down in the 2nd chapter of Tanya. Previously in chapter 2 of Tanya, that God's knowledge and intellect are totally different from man's. When a mortal king knows something, 3 distinctive identities are involved. Number 1, the knower, the person in possession of that knowledge. The knowledge, it's not the knower, the person is not the knowledge. The person acquires the knowledge. So the knowledge, the intellect faculty, which enables him to know, and the known. So you have to have three entities. You have the person, you have his knowledge, that he has the capacity of knowledge, and then you have the known, the particular item of knowledge, which he knows. So you have three different concepts. And there are three different realities. There's the person, there is his knowledge, and there's what he knows. And therefore, the three different entities by a human being. God, however, is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. He that is knows, and the vehicle through which he knows, and that which he knows are all himself. Which the Rambam writes, it's something that a person cannot comprehend, this concept. This concept alone is a concept that's above human capability of understanding, to the essence. That the Eibishter is one. Thus his knowledge is wholly united, wholly identified with his essence. And what does that mean? Ubi dias atzmai, and knowing himself, kaviyachol, so as it were, yedeya kol nivraim, he knows all created. So God, by knowing himself, he knows everything, because he is his knowledge and himself is one. So knowing himself, he knows everything. And it's not with a knowledge that's external of himself, that there's God and what he knows. God and what he knows is the same thing. Like the knowledge of a human being, it's not that way. The knowledge of a human being is the human being and what he knows. And the knowledge is separate from him. By the Eibishter, he is the knowledge. So again, this is important. By knowing himself, as it were, he knows all created beings. Be a dias atzmai. By knowing himself, he comprehends everything. So human knowledge requires getting to know something which is external to the knower himself. Not so God. Not so God's knowledge. He comes from his knowing. It comes from knowing himself. For all the created beings are derived from his true reality. So that's why, again, God is called true reality, true existence. He exists because he exists. That's the same concept of the aspect as b'dias atzmai, knowing himself. God, by knowing himself, is what he knows. God is the true existence. He exists because he exists, not because of another existence. Not because for another entity does God exist. So God's true reality and existence is the source of all created beings. By knowing himself, therefore, as mentioned just above, he knows all creation. And the Alter Rebbe writes, which the Rambam writes, and this thing that I just said is not within the power of human beings to comprehend clearly, etc. The human being cannot possibly grasp the concept of knowledge, knowledge, knower, and known, all being one and the same. Whatever matter a man may desire to comprehend, he imagines how it exists within himself, bearing in mind, of course, that the matter at hand is the knowledge of godliness. It is to be conceived on a more exalted abstract plane than the simple human existence. Since God's manner of knowledge is totally dissimilar from man's, it is thus impossible for him to picture it at all. It must forever remain behind his ken. He is the knower and the knowledge, and so on, is the quotation from the Rambam. This is a statement of Maimonides. There are prominent sages who take issue with this view. Amongst them is the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yodelau of Prague. Introduction to give in the Gevurat Hashem, the Maharal raises numerous objections to the thesis of the Rambam. One of the most telling arguments, the descriptive term knowledge or intellect, is one of limitation. So he argues with the whole premise to call God a knowledge or known. By terming something intellect, we are thereby saying that it's not anything other than intellect, such as feelings, actions, or whatever. If you call God Chachma, that means God, it's separate from midas, from emotions. And for surely it's separate from action. And how can we possibly say God is limited in any way? So he was angry, and angry is the wrong word. He had an argument with the Rambam that the Rambam would call God the knowledge, that God is knowledge, or God's unknown. You can't even say that on the Eibishter. The Eibishter is above all these, God is above all these concepts. That was his argument with the Rambam. The ultimate individual is simplicity, not a complex, distinct, limited attributes. Even if we hoist that God's knowledge and man are totally dissimilar, that man is incapable of comprehending how God's both simultaneously knower and knower and known, yet the fact still remains that knowledge is a specific attribute. We're speaking of knowledge to the exclusion of everything else. This cannot possibly serve the description of God's essence. So he argued with the Rambam. Maharal goes on to, I didn't realize how long this is. Maharal goes on to point out that the sage of the Talmud referred to God as the Holy One, blessed be He, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not the intellect, blessed be He. Holy means separate and apart, utterly transcending anything within the realm of description. And it's specifically because He is above anything and beyond all description that everything derives from Him. For He is limited in no respect that might preclude the existence of everything. Intellect, the Maharal teaches, is merely one of God's creations. See in this light, and God knew, is no different when a God said or God made. Thus as God's speech and action are not His essence, but the faculties which brought about being, so too regard to knowledge, the attribute of knowledge and intellect are His creation. So this was a big debate between the Rambam and the Maharal Mipag. The Alter Rebbe explains in this note that the scholars of Kabbalah subscribe to the view of the Rambam. The divine knowledge ought to be considered in terms of knowledge, knower, and known. So the Kabbalah, the Alter Rebbe says that the Kabbalah they go according to the Rambam. However, they specify that this only applies to the light of Ein Sof, contracted into the 10 spheres of Atzilus, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and so on. Meaning, after the clothing itself light in the vessel, only after the light of Chachma closes the vessel of Chachma, the light of Bina and the vessel of Bina, and so forth. Meaning, only after the entities already exist is it possible to say that this knowledge and intellect is totally one with God. However, before the contraction, before Tzimtzum, within these spheres, God supremely transcends all intellectual wisdom, even as they exist in most abstract, refined form. So the Alter Rebbe says maybe there's no argument between the Rambam and the Maharal Mipag. The Rambam's talking in the way the Ohr Ein Sof comes into the world of Atzilus. So the way Ohr Ein Sof comes into the world of Atzilus, we have Chachma, Bina, and Das. And the Maharal Mipag is talking about the way it's above, it's before Kedem HaTzimtzum. It's before contraction. Before contraction, we cannot say in God that is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So they're not arguing really together. According to the teaching of Chassidus, follow along with Rabbi Yitzchak Luria interpretation of doctrine of Tzimtzum, the view both of the Rambam are correct and Maharal are both correct. So the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe says, according to the Arizal, there's no argument between the Rambam and the Maharal Mipag. God's essential existence and being before contraction of godliness is described by the Maharal, an existence unqualified, simplicity beyond the pale of knowledge and intellect, in whatever form they may take, even to the subtle knowledge of knower, known, and known. However, once contraction took place, the spheres came into being, then his vesture in them may probably be described as a saying, in the words of the Rambam, he's the knower and the known and the knowledge. So in the world of Atzilus, as we learned in Chassidus many times, in the world of emanation, over there, God is united, so to say, with his Sfiris. And that's why the Rambam says that we cannot comprehend the world of Atzilus. That's what the Rambam is saying. Now we cannot comprehend, we could say about it, but we really cannot really comprehend the concept of what is the world of Atzilus in reality. Because over there, God and his emanations are one. He's the knower, the known, and the known. So therefore, where do we comprehend this concept? Once it comes into the world of Bria. Once over there with the Sfirot, that's what it's called, the world of creation. Once it comes into the world of creation, with there the Sfiras are more defined. As Chassidus explains, what's the difference between the world of emanation, the world of Atzilus, and the world of creation? In the world of emanation, is more oiros, there's much light and less vessels. While in the world of Bria, there's more vessels than light. So we see now more the concept of vessels. What are the vessels? Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, etc. So this is because the Sfiris in an emanation of godness rather than created beings. As such, they are wholly united regarding the world of Atzilus. This expressed the statement of Tunizaya, he and his life-giving emanations, the oiros, the lights, in the 10 Sfiris of the world of Atzilus are one. He and his causations, Kalim vessels of the Sfiris Atzilus are one. That is to say, that Ein and Sefer light is one with the lights of the vessels of Atzilus. This is exactly the same as saying, he and his knowledge, and the knowledge and the Sfiris are truly one, as the Maral Miprak says. In the view of Maral Miprak too, it's fraught with difficulties. First of all, we noted that the scripture does attribute knowledge of God, his understanding beyond his reckoning. Furthermore, it appears unreasonable to argue that God's knowledge is dependent on a created entity. According to the nation of Chassidus, then, all these difficulties, both those of the view of the Maral and those of the Rambam, are satisfactorily resolved because God's essence is indeed beyond description. That's the Maral Miprag. Yet it's still the knowledge of no unknown as he unifies himself in the world of Atzilus, and that's the Rambam. After they're coming into being through the medium of a symptom of a contraction. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to say now in his Haggadah, his parentheses. So the words of the Alter Rebbe, so just explain to you what he's going to say. It might be hard to understand in the actual words. As the Rambam writes in Maimonides, the Rambam writes, Beis Abchira, knower, the known, the knowledge, the known, and the knower, the known. I'm sorry, the knowledge, the knower, and the known. V'hiskimu be'imei chachma Kabbalah, and the scholars of Kabbalah have agreed with him. When she calls him a Pardes, as it brought down in Pardes, of Marak, of Moshe Kordevor, Zochen Levracha. V'chein li for Kabbalah Arizal, Zochen Levracha. And it's also according to the Kabbalah of our master, Rabbi Yitzchak Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, blessed memory. It was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal, who first revealed the doctrine of Tzimtzum, which taught that God exalted essence is even more removed from the Sfiris than we thought it was before then. So he brought about the concept, he taught this, he revealed the concept of Tzimtzum. It was thus be logical to assume that since he stressed this infinite distance from the Sfiris, the Sfira of Chachma, for example, he would be unable to accept the statement, he is the knower. Nevertheless, his teaching holds true even according to him. But with the Pravo, besides in the mystery, doctrine of contraction, and the clothing of the lights of the Sfiris and the vessels of the Sfiris are explained previous chapter 2 in the world of Atzilus. The unity of God, the divine Sfiris, is so absolute that even according to the Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, one may safely say that this unity, he is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. Before the above note, Alter Rebbe stated that the God's knowledge is united with his essence and being. since he is infinite, his knowledge is infinite as well. It is therefore impossible for this knowledge to pervade the earth. It must encompass it. This is true, of course, not only God's knowledge of the earth, but the creation as whole. Since this knowledge, that since it's an infinite order, it's not described as clothed within the orb of the earth. You cannot say that this earth comes into the earth, what we call the Malak Alman, the way the gods fill the earth, because it's too powerful, it's too above, it's too infinite. And therefore, we call it encircling it and encompassing it. Even though this knowledge way, God, it's in God, the entire thickness of superior actual reality. But that's the concept. The way the Eibishter is ain't safe, infinite, and everything is within him. But the way the world looks at it, the way we look at it, we cannot comprehend that unity. So therefore, we say that it's encompassing, that it's not revealed within it. Unlike the knowledge of a human being, which encompasses only the image of an object and not its reality, God's knowledge embraces the object in actual reality. Not that he only embraces it. He gives it existence. The thought itself not only embraces the knowledge, it gives it existence. From something, an existence from something to something, from nothing to something. So creation does not come about from a glimmer of godliness found within the object, which sustains it only in inanimate vegetable level, but from the supernal knowledge. That's what the Alter Rebbe wants to bring out ultimately. We shouldn't think we're all come from an expression or an outer light of God. We all come, everything in the world ultimately comes from the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the supernal knowledge that encompasses it and encircles it. And although this knowledge is responsible for the object's existence, it's still described and encompassing. For so much of the knowledge is infinite, while the created being is finite, this knowledge is unable to enclose itself within a created being. It encompasses, it cannot be revealed in this finite world, because then the finite will lose its finity. As explained elsewhere, that creation ex nihilo can take place only as a result of the encompassing light. So we know the Alter Rebbe is told when the Alter Rebbe said the word Atzilus, he couldn't be able to say the word Atzilus. He would say Atzi. You couldn't get through the word Atzilus. So the Alter Rebbe was a great tzaddik. Maybe he saw the Atzilus. He had an understanding in Atzilus. It was such a, and he therefore couldn't even say the word Atzilus because it was such a high level. As the Rambam himself writes, if you understand that the knower and the knowledge and the known are all one, that is Atzilus. And that, as the Rambam says, is impossible for a normal human being to comprehend. So you can say about it, you can talk about it, you can explain the world of Atzilus, but to truly comprehend how there is total unity, oneness in that concept, is very hard for a human being to even understand that concept. To its essence, as the Al-Buri, I can understand it in abstract, but to understand it to the essence is impossible. That ends the Tanya, that ends the chapter 48 in Tanya. Tomorrow, Mitzvah, you'll learn the whole chapter 49 of Tanya. We are in the 16th day of the month, which is in the Tehillim, chapter 79 to chapter 82. If you say those 4 chapters, you do the chitas of the day. Wish you all a good night of Shabbos. I wish you all a good Shabbos. Hope that you continue to learn chitas by yourself on Shabbos. And in Mitzvah, we'll see you all Sunday, 8 o'clock. We'll continue to learn the chitas of the day. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. God bless us all, that we should have a wonderful and beautiful Shabbos to all of Jews around the world.